All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be digging into the world of Torenia fournieri. You might know it as the wishbone flower, and specifically, it's self-seeding, how good it is at self-seeding. Our source today is this really interesting blog post from kianmeng.org, and the title of it is Notes on Gardening, Part 469. Torenia fournieri is nature's prolific self-seeder. So yeah, get ready to have your mind blown a little bit about this plant and how it can maybe change how you think about gardening a little bit.
Oh, definitely. Self-seeding is a fascinating topic, and Torenia fournieri is a champion in that regard.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. The author of the blog, his name is Ang, observed something pretty remarkable. He found Torenia fournieri seedlings popping up not just in their original pot, but also in a nearby pot of chrysanthemums. So it's like they just kind of decided to expand their territory all on their own. What's the secret behind this adventurous spirit?
Well, Torenia fournieri, it produces these tiny seeds within drying capsules. And when these capsules split open, the seeds are scattered, sometimes by the wind or, in this case, simply by proximity to another pot. I don't know if you've ever seen dandelion seeds spread, but they just effortlessly float on the breeze.
Yeah.
Torenia fournieri is kind of like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ang even compares this to fake daisies. I guess he had some fake daisies that he had to release into the wild due to some pest problems. But, getting back to the Torenia fournieri, he noticed this spreading tendency and kind of realized that smaller pots might not be the best choice for this plant.
That's a really good observation, actually. When a plant self-seeds, as much as Torenia fournieri, you really need to consider the space that all those seedlings are going to need to germinate and thrive.
Yeah.
If you've got a cramped root system, it can really hinder a plant's growth and overall health. Imagine, imagine you're trying to grow in a pot that's too small for your roots. It's not going to work out well.
All right.
Same for plants.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So how do we figure out the right pot size for a plant like this? Is there some kind of rule of thumb we can follow?
I mean, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all answer, but it's really important to consider both root development and the space for all those self-sown seedlings, right? For Torenia fournieri, I would say, a pot that's at least 6 to 8 inches in diameter would be ideal. It gives the roots plenty of space to establish themselves while also giving those seedlings a chance to get going.
That makes a lot of sense. Ang also mentions that he's excited to see how those Torenia fournieri seedlings develop in the coming months. What are the factors, besides pot size, that influence how well a seedling does? I mean, we've talked about space, but what else is there?
Well, there's a whole ecosystem of factors that we need to consider. Everything from the type of soil they're planted in to how much sunlight they're getting, it can all affect their growth. And we can actually learn something from Ang's observation and apply it to our own more intentional seedling care.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to break down those factors a little bit if we want to really understand how to make the most of Torenia fournieri's self-seeding talent.
Yeah, let's start with the soil. What kind of soil do these seedlings need to really thrive?
Well, soil it's kind of like the foundation of a plant's world, For Torenia fournieri seedlings, you're going to want a soil that's loose and well-draining. You don't want their roots, those little delicate roots, to get waterlogged. That can lead to, problems like root rot. It's a good seed-starting mix, or even just a blend of peat moss and perlite. That can create a really good environment for those tiny roots to get established.
Okay, so peat moss and perlite sounds like we're going for like a balance of moisture retention, but also good drainage.
Exact.
Okay, so what about sunlight? Do these Torenia fournieri seedlings, do they like to bask in the sun, or do they prefer a little bit of shade?
Well, Torenia fournieri actually thrives in bright, indirect light. So, think of it like a comfortable sunroom, right?
Yeah.
They can soak up the warmth without getting scorched by, the direct rays of the sun.
Got it.
A spot that gets morning sun or maybe filtered sunlight throughout the day, that would be ideal.
Got it. Bright but not blazing. Okay. Now, on to the essential element for, well, pretty much all living things.
Okay.
Water.
Right.
How do we strike that balance between keeping the soil moist but not, drowning our little seedlings?
Yeah, watering is super important, and consistency is really key here. You want to aim to keep the soil evenly moist, but not soggy. A gentle watering can, or even just a spray bottle, that can be really helpful so you don't disturb those tiny seedlings. As they grow, you can gradually reduce how often you water them. allowing the top inch of soil to dry out a little bit between waterings. It's almost like you're teaching them to become more self-sufficient as they mature.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so we're nurturing them in the beginning, and then we're kind of encouraging them to be more independent as they grow.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But even with, even with the best care, there can be challenges, right? What kind of pests or diseases should we be on the lookout for when it comes to Torenia fournieri seedlings?
Well, Torenia fournieri it's generally a pretty tough plant, but just like any plant, they can be susceptible to some of those common garden pests, aphids, spider mites, whiteflies. Those are usually the main culprits. The key is to, just keep a close eye on your seedlings and deal with any infestations early on.
Early detection is key. Okay, so what are some ways we can deal with these pests if we do spot them?
Well, a simple insecticidal soap or a neem oil spray, those can be really effective. Those are a little bit gentler than using harsher chemical pesticides. Think of it as giving your seedlings a little boost in their fight against those pesky invaders.
Yeah, we're like their protectors in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So we've covered soil, we've talked about sunlight, water, and even some pest control strategies. Anything else we should keep in mind as we embark on this Torenia fournieri seedling journey?
One thing Eng's observation really highlights is the importance of patience. Nature, it works on its own timeline, and watching seedlings develop, it's really a beautiful lesson in that. It's slow, it's steady, and it's important not to get discouraged if you don't see, immediate results. Just trust the process, observe those tiny changes, and enjoy that journey of growth.
Patience, a virtue for gardeners and humans in general, I think. There's something so fascinating about seeing new life emerge from these tiny seeds. And Eng, he talks about being fascinated by this process, and I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Oh, absolutely. It's a reminder of the incredible power of nature and the interconnectedness of all living things. It kind of brings us back to that initial observation of those Torenia fournieri seedlings popping up in that chrysanthemum pot.
Right.
What does that tell us about this plant?
Well, it tells us that it's adaptable. It can survive, even thrive in kind of unexpected places.
Exactly. It really speaks to how ingenious nature's design is. Plants have evolved these incredible mechanisms to ensure their survival, and self-seeding it's a perfect example of that.
Yeah. It's like they have this drive to spread their beauty and ensure that their species continues on. It's pretty amazing to see that in our own gardens. But observing is only the first step, right? How can we as gardeners use this knowledge? What can we do with this? I mean, it seems like, a lot of the time in our gardens we're trying to like control nature, we're planting things in neat little rows. But what if we kind of took a page from Torenia fournieri's book and worked with this, self-seeding tendency?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. Imagine if we, kind of shifted our perspective from seeing self-seeding as this thing that we have to control to something that we can actually work with, something we can harness. Eng's observation, I think, really opens up some possibilities for, a more sustainable way of gardening.
Yeah. It's like nature is giving us the blueprint,
Exactly.
Could we get to a point where, by working with self-seeding plants like Torenia fournieri, we could actually have a more hands-off approach to gardening?
I think it definitely has that potential. If we can create the right conditions for self-seeding to happen naturally, then we could maybe reduce our reliance on, commercially produced seeds. We could have gardens that kind of regenerate themselves year after year.
That would be amazing. Less reliance on commercial seeds, more resilient gardens. It sounds almost too good to be true. So what would be the first step in moving towards that?
Well, I think the first step is observation, just like Eng did. We need to pay attention to how plants are naturally propagating in our own gardens and figure out which ones are already, successfully self-seeding. Once we kind of understand those patterns, then we can start to work with them a little bit better.
Okay, so it's about understanding the specific characteristics of each plant, of each species, and then creating an environment where they can do their thing.
Right.
It's a very different way of thinking about gardening, I think, than what a lot of us are used to.
It is a shift in perspective, but I think it's a shift that aligns with a more sustainable and just a more harmonious way of relating to nature. It's less about, control and more about a kind of collaboration, I guess you could say.
Yeah, like we're becoming partners with our plants.
Yeah.
We're working together to create this thriving little ecosystem in our backyard. I like that.
Yeah. And the cool thing is that this kind of approach, it often leads to more diverse gardens, more resilient gardens.
Mm,
When we kind of, loosen the reins a little bit, we create space for nature to do its thing.
yeah, that's a good point. So to kind of wrap up our deep dive into Torenia fournieri and this whole fascinating world of self-seeding, uh, I think what we've learned is that this little flower, it's like a master of propagation, right?
Hmm.
Pot size is really important. And by observing these natural tendencies, we can actually get some really valuable insights into how to create, more sustainable gardens, more harmonious gardens.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just one example, right? There are so many other self-seeding plants out there, each with their own, story to tell, lessons to teach.
Which brings us to a final thought for our listeners to kind of chew on.
Yeah.
If we take this cue from Torenia fournieri and we start seeing our gardens as these miniature ecosystems, how might that change our approach to gardening? Could we learn to create spaces that not only support individual plants, but like the whole web of life that supports them?
That's a great question to consider. And I think the answer lies in continuing to observe, continuing to experiment, and just being willing to learn from nature's wisdom.
Absolutely. We encourage you to share your own experiences with self-seeding plants, whether it's Torenia fournieri or some other species that's kind of surprised you with how resilient it is and how ingenious it is. Let's keep the conversation going and keep learning from each other as we explore this amazing world of plants. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.